All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Devereaux. As Bill was saying, I work on strategy and innovation for the Google School for Leaders. And I'm excited to be here with you today to talk a little bit about what we're up to in the leadership development space at Google, and also why we believe that it's more important than ever that companies focus on leadership development. We are truly in a moment in history. Technology is shaping and changing the way that we live our lives in really profound ways. Global and organizational leaders, particularly in the tech industry, are under immense pressure to exercise the power that they hold responsibly and morally. And rightfully so, right? You know, technology is a part of our everyday lives now. Many of us interact with technology hundreds of times in a single day. That's hundreds of opportunities for technology to influence our perceptions and our behaviors. It's a big responsibility, and we take it extremely seriously at Google. The decisions that our leaders are making are shaping the future of the world. They're shaping how society functions and how humans will function in that society in an age of rapid artificial intelligence advancement. There's a lot of heat on the tech industry right now when it comes to decision making. I'm sure some of your news feeds have been filled with that. Mine has. And you know, our leaders tell us at Google that they feel like they have to get it right every time. They feel a responsibility to their employees, to our customers, to the world, to always know what's coming next. But what happens when the challenges in front of us are so complex that there is no right answer? It's not about finding the right answer. It doesn't exist. There are no best practices. There are no playbooks. There are no experts to ask. Nobody's done this before. So what happens when there's no possible way of knowing what's next? I love this quote by Jeff Colvin, the author of Humans Are Underrated. He says, as automation continues, humans will remain not only valuable, but powerful. Leaders with hybrid skills, high technological literacy, and deep social sensitivity will win the future. If we are to continue to advance our technology, we have to also up-level ourselves. At Google, we talk a lot about upgrading our operating system of our leaders. And as humans, our operating system is consciousness. This is why we focus a lot on creating deeply human leaders at Google. Google talks about leaders who can see further, who can think wider, and who can empower others to positively shape Google and also the societies that we impact. Now, this was a pretty serious shift for us in terms of how we talk about leadership development. This isn't the way that we've traditionally always done this. It really required us to think about how do we make continuous transformation the new normal at Google. There is no finish line. Welcome aboard. You're literally going to be at this forever. So some people, that's really exciting, lifelong learning, right? Others, it can be overwhelming. But as Google works to deliver on our mission and our purpose, it sounds a little dramatic, but we literally believe that we can't get there. We can't have the kind of positive impact that we want to have in the world unless we're focused on leadership development and leader transformation as a key business strategy. Now, Google's been doing leadership development for a while. In fact, in 2008, we had over a dozen teams that were spread out across the company, spread out across the world, who were all trying to build better leaders for Google. We were delivering programs, we were admittedly doing trust falls, and honestly, we were approaching leadership development in a pretty traditional way. In 2017, we started rethinking our approach to leadership development. Instead of techniques, we shifted to mindsets. Instead of best practice, we shifted to something that we call next practice. We realized that it was more important for us to solve the leadership development challenges of the future than it was for us to focus on the problems of the past or even the present in some cases. It's been 2 years now since we started building the Google School for Leaders, and we've learned a lot of things along the way. There's still a lot to do. We're not done. We'll never be done. Lifelong learning. But we've learned some really valuable lessons along the way that I wanted to share with you. So first, if Google is to succeed in an increasingly demanding and dynamic future, we need leaders who can keep pace. We need leaders who can see beyond the edge of what's currently possible. One of the things that we've been saying a little bit internally that's been gaining some traction is we need leaders who can lead at the speed of AI. Second, knowledge is becoming more and more outdated. Unless you're talking about the basics, and I'm talking about the real basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, knowledge is outdated almost as fast as humans can acquire it. In this new future, knowledge is no longer power, and in some cases, knowledge can actually be a detriment to a leader if they overuse it. We need leaders who can unlearn just as easily as they can learn. Leaders, again, who embrace lifelong learning, continuous transformation as a core value. And this is going to take a mindset shift, not a framework. And then third, leadership development needs to be treated with consistency and not just intensity. So how many of you have gone to a leadership development workshop? And you've gone for a couple days, and everything sounds great. You're super excited to come back to your core role, to come back to your day-to-day, and implement all of these new great strategies and ways of thinking that you've learned over the course of your few days away. Does that sound familiar to anyone? A few people? Definitely familiar to me, I'll admit that. And then you get back into your day-to-day, and it's like, oh, but the grind. And it's so hard to actually take those things that seemed so accessible while you were away and bring them back into the way that you do your jobs on a regular basis. And that's treating leadership development with intensity and not consistency. So we really talked about, okay, how do we incorporate key messages across all of our offerings, and how do we make sure that we have learning reinforcement that allows us to give people the opportunity to truly transform. And what we learned is that transformation takes dedication and it takes practice. You're not going to get it done in a one-shot deal. So the Google School for Leaders is a global leadership center of excellence that's aimed at building future-ready leaders for Google. The school, as we call it, focuses on programmatic, community-driven, and truly immersive experiences that challenge our leaders' mindsets, their assumptions, even their identity. Our goal is to equip our leaders with practices and programs that are going to help them to be able to function in an ever-changing future, a future where the known is just not possible anymore in a lot of cases. Now, we do this by placing innovation at the center of our strategy. It's really core to everything that we do. And we focus a lot on what we call next practice now, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. So next practice is the output, one of the outputs of Google's innovation model for leadership development. And the innovation model is what you see on the screen here. And unlike best practices, which are based on things that have been tried before, right? They're things that have worked, hopefully. I mean, that's why they become best practices. You don't necessarily want to, make the things that didn't work into best practices. But next practice is really derived by using a set of tools that help us to understand what's coming next, to really understand future possibilities and move beyond, again, what we know today. So the tools that we use are trending, scanning, and as you see here, foresight, to generate insights about the future. We then refine these practices in the incubation stage of the model before integrating them into the school's offerings. And the integration is done through a set of theories that help to bring these practices to life. And there are 4 key theories that we've used over and over and over again throughout our leadership development offerings that I wanna take you through, and how those show up in our offerings. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the theory, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about the practical application. So the first one is adult development theory, and this is nothing new, right? Like adult development theory, that was first published in the 1980s. It was refined in kind of the 1990s by Robert Kegan at Harvard. So how many people have either heard of adult development theory or worked with it in the past? Yeah, quite a few of you. More people than have gone to a leadership development program and then not implemented things afterwards. So a good number of you have done this. So I'll keep this really brief. So Kegan basically says that there are 5 distinct stages of development on the way to adulthood. So the first one is impulsive, and you'll notice that we don't have that here. We make the assumption that the majority of our leaders are probably no longer in the impulsive stage. So we do not focus on that for very much time. So the first one's impulsive. The second one is self-sovereign. Then you've got socialized, self-authored, and self-transformative. And the theory really helps us to understand the markers of each one of these stages, where we are within them, which stage we're in, and then strategies for, okay, how do we shift, into another stage? And conventional wisdom, through decades of research, tells us that around 65% of the human adult population never moves beyond socialized, and only 1% actually makes it to self-transformative. So there's a little bit of work to do here. So I mentioned that adult development is nothing new, but when we teach adult development at Google, we approach things just a little bit differently. So for each one of the stages, we've actually plotted out a physical course in the Redwood Forest in the Santa Cruz Mountains for our participants in a 3-day program to actually go through and follow. And at each one of these stations, it represents the stage of the adult development theory. And we've got these custom kind of like mirrored art installations at each one of the stages to help people really reflect on where they're at and how they relate to it. So for socialized, for instance, we have a series of rear view mirrors that we mount onto a tree. And when the person who's kind of in the hot seat, right, is standing in front of these mirrors, they can't see themselves, but they can see everyone else around them. For self-authored, we have this giant interconnected set of rotating mirrors that you see on the slide here. And no matter where you stand around this thing, you can always see yourself, and you can always see a 360 view of your surroundings. Now, participants walk this route twice over the course of the program, and they're prompted by a facilitator. We break them into small groups. Each small group has a facilitator. And they walk through here twice, and the facilitator prompts them with a series of questions. And they're the same questions, the first time they walk it and the second time they walk it. And the difference after having gone through about a day and a half of content in between that and a day and a half of really immersive experiences, the difference in their answers is just striking. Now, I do want to say that this looks really fancy. So I always like to stress that those rear view mirrors, which we do not harm the tree, in case anyone's worried. We're very careful to not hurt the tree when we put them up there. And the rear view mirrors are pulled off of junk cars, actually. I think we pay like $50 to get into a junkyard, and we can take as many mirrors as we can carry. And then the large, interconnected, very beautifully photographed installation here is actually plywood with mirrored decals stretched over top of it. So we've destroyed it twice and had to rebuild it because of rain, because we couldn't get it out of the rain fast enough for it to not disintegrate on us. So it's, it looks really impressive, and honestly, it's pretty scrappy, and it's just a lot of creativity. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that one of the big things that we've learned is that true transformation requires dedication and practice. So the next theory that I want to talk a little bit about is mindsets, and we've talked quite a bit about mindsets at this conference. I'm not talking about growth mindset and fixed mindset, actually. We have a set of mindsets that we have created at Google. It's 6, and we are hoping to publish them later this year. We're getting really close, but they're proprietary for right now, so I won't be talking about them in depth. But the leadership, what we've found is that leadership really requires more than just problem solving. It requires a level of self-knowledge and a level of self-awareness that really helps leaders to be able to examine and challenge their assumptions, their values, and even their identity. To make the kind of consistent change that we need from our leaders at Google, we've expanded our leadership development strategy to address both skill sets and mindsets, so competence and consciousness. And mindsets is really at the center of all of our curriculum, all of our programming and non-programmatic kind of outside of the classroom offerings. We believe that mindset and moving mindset is the way to attain sustainable transformation. So that's really at the center of everything that we do. So our own internal research has shown us that mindset shifts are much more effective through deliberate practice than through kind of your more traditional competency models. And notice, act, reflect, repeat, that's one of the practices that we've created and then implemented across all of our offerings. So notice, you've got that awareness piece again, take some action, reflect on it, probably tweak a few things here and there, and then repeat the process. And we integrate this pattern, this practice into, as I said, across all of our offerings so that by the time you get to a certain point in the leadership development journey, you're pretty good at this. You're like, oh yeah, I'm noticing. Okay, there's probably something here that I need to notice, and now I'm going to act, and now I'm going to reflect on it and figure out how to change it for next time. So we want to give people the opportunity to practice over and over and over again. Again, consistency, not just intensity. So one of the ways that we're helping leaders notice is through a program called Leadership Immersion. And what we do in this program is we take people into environments that are radically different from their day-to-day. So we take them to places like Jerusalem and the West Bank, where nearly constant war and deep racial tensions have existed for centuries. We take them to places like Detroit, Michigan, which is my hometown, where again, deep racial tensions and the devastating effect of the decline of the auto industry has people fighting for their, fighting for their neighborhoods and their communities. I care a lot about my hometown. And we also take them to McDowell County, West Virginia, which is the seat of the US opioid crisis, where local leaders are literally fighting for the lives of their neighbors. These environments serve as catalysts to help leaders notice something about their assumptions and their beliefs that may have been hidden from them before. So to illustrate just how powerful these experiences are, I pulled a few quotes from past participants that I wanted to share with you all. So I was reminded that leadership is really a state of mind and encapsulated in the choices I make at different points in time every day. I watched our group become more present, thoughtful, empathetic, and brave in declaring actions and next steps. I am a different leader, colleague, husband, and father today than I was on Monday. So, next, theory number 3, I want to talk a little bit about conversation and the power of conversation as a change agent. So one of the things that we've learned from our work with complexity theory is that when there's a really complex challenge in front of you, sometimes it's better to ask another question when the answer is not clear. Not necessarily to obsessively work the problem. One of the things that I've talked about at these conferences before is the fallacy of overthinking Overthinking does not make us better problem solvers. Sometimes we just need to ask a different question. Our belief at Google is that change starts with conversations between people. And these catalyzing conversations often start with asking different questions. As you might imagine, Googlers are pretty focused on answers as a company, as a culture. We like answers. Answers oftentimes lead to progress, and we're trying to make progress at Google on some really big, gnarly challenges that are facing the world. So when we published the first edition of the school paper, which is a publication that we actually put on paper, like we printed it, which doesn't happen very often. We're like, there's different types of paper, right? Like we're gonna have, okay, how do we bind things? We don't have one of those. So it was a very interesting moment where we're like, all right, we're going old school. We're gonna print this out and we're actually gonna put it on people's desks. And when we did that, and what happened was when the leaders opened it up and they saw, oh wow, a list of considered questions instead of answers, instead of best practices, instead of tips and tricks, you can imagine what the response was. Now, they eventually, came along for the ride, but the response made sense. Learning and development, and it's no different at Google, often is associated with answers. We're the people who are going to tell you how to do something, not ask you how you think you should do it. And so when we shifted to this model where it was all about questions and it was about conversation and it was about talking about complex issues that may not have an answer, our leaders were thrown off guard a little bit. But we really weren't interested in kind of, a typical approach and those tips and tricks. We wanted to inspire leaders to look deep within themselves and deep within their organizations to create systemic change. And for that, we needed questions, not answers. So the last one that I wanted to talk a little bit about is called Neuroaesthetics. And neuroaesthetics is an area of study that seeks to help us understand why we as human beings find something beautiful or moving. And this area of study is particularly interesting to us within the Google School for Leaders because we're looking at how do these sensory experiences, the way that we interact with the external environment, how does that influence learning and transformation? And how can we cultivate the external environment in order to enhance learning and transformation? So we ran a couple experiments, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what they looked like. So the first one was around event spaces. And we're really careful at Google to look at making sure that the event spaces that we use are actually aligned with the goals of our program. So we're not going to host, an event on well-being and resilience at the same location where we might host Nooglers. So new Googler equals Noogler. So that's our onboarding, new hire lingo. And we're not going to host those at the same place, right? So we're really careful to say, okay, it's not just about does the venue that we're choosing have the nuts and bolts, in order for us to do it. Do they have enough capacity in the main room? Do they have enough breakout rooms, et cetera? That's not enough for us. We want to make sure that the feeling that you get when you walk into that location maps up, with the goals of the program. We also look at furniture and objects, and as crazy as this sounds, the chairs matter. The way that the rugs are layered so that they don't look like they were just thrown haphazardly in the middle of the circle actually matters. So think about when you walk into a space and it's obvious that it's been really thoughtfully and carefully designed by somebody who's got an interior design aesthetic. And the way that you feel when you walk in there and you say, oh, wow, that's a really artful way of placing that vase next to that succulent. I like that. But you may not consciously think that, but actually it's affecting you when you see that vase and that succulent and they're actually working together. And you know what? The line in that vase sort of matches the rug. And you don't consciously realize any of this, but you walk in and it's just got that feeling to it. So when we put our programs together, we're very careful to choose furniture and objects that not only fit the event space, but also fit each other, so that when you walk in, all you're thinking about is learning. You're dropping into that space of being able to relax and learn and be open. We also looked at signature scents, and yes, that is a little nose. So I am talking about things that you smell. We worked with a woman in Berkeley, her name's Mandy Aftal, to create a couple of signature scents that we use for relaxation and reflection. So we'll drop a little pillow spray in your room when you get there after the program's first day, so that you can spray your pillow with relaxation, should you choose. And then we have a couple of activities that we run in a few of our programs where they're asking for a level of vulnerability very early on that we want people to feel like they can reflect, that they can drop down quickly into that place of being able to, really engage with us. And we've been running with this reflection scent for kind of the last 18 months or so we have a good amount of data. And the people who actually use it report that they were able to get more out of these activities than the people who didn't kind of come along for the fun. Okay, threshold rituals. So a couple things that we do. We have a detach station where we ask people to please plug in or don't plug in, just turn them off, whatever you want, but move your devices. Your device cannot be on your person. So it's not optional. You are not allowed to have devices in our circles. And we have a beautiful place for you to put them. And actually, if it's an emotional experience for you to sort of leave your phone, to abandon it that way, and you're worried, we actually have little sweaters, like hand-knitted sweaters, and you can tuck your phone into the hand-knitted sweater, and it'll be all cozy and warm and waiting for you when you get back. So if you're concerned, we got you covered on that one. We also have something that we call a personal storage unit, because we know that physical clutter creates mental clutter. So in addition to your phones not being in the circle, your stuff can't be in the circle. So pick it up. And we have a great place for you to put it. It's beautiful. It's got little accessories that's curated all around it so that it feels like, okay, my purse will be safe in this cubby. I feel okay about this. And then the final thing that I wanted to highlight for you is we have what we call a welcome station. And when people walk in to the room, before they do anything else, there's a little table, and there's a little safe, and there's a piece of paper, and we welcome them to write down something that they actually have to leave behind and lock it up in the safe in order for them to be fully present and for them to really engage with us. Another thing that we look at are natural elements, so bringing the outdoors indoors, so that even when we're in a conference room, and we do a lot of immersive experiences, and we're not in the conference room, as much as I would say, definitely we used to be when we were doing trust falls, but you want people to feel like they can commune with nature. There's something about that by having live plants that actually makes a space feel different. And then finally, we have curated music. And I'll be brief on this one, but basically, you're not going to play the same piece of music like at a social hour or at the fire pit after dinner that you would play during a deeply emotional experience where everybody's crying in the first 5 minutes. Those are they really should be. They're probably different pieces of music. So we want to make sure that for each component of the program that we're being thoughtful about what kind of music we're using, because again, just like the furniture, you're not quite sure why this room feels great, but it feels great. It's the same kind of deal with music. You're not really sure why you feel at ease right now or why you feel kind of ready to go and pumped up. But music does that to us. So we're really thoughtful about what music we use when. Okay, so neuroaesthetics is something that we believe pretty strongly in at the school. So much so that we actually took a really big leap and we built out a space on our Mountain View campus for our leadership development programs that incorporates all of the experiments that I just talked through with you, as well as more. So we worked with Johns Hopkins University. They are the leading expert on Neuroaesthetics to design the space, and we're working with them right now to actually measure the effectiveness and figure out, okay, how are these these elements that we've incorporated affecting us physiologically, and how is that then translating into better learning and better transformation, or not? So the next time I'm on a stage for Bill, I'll tell you how it went. So the space just opened in June, and actually we haven't talked about it externally yet. I got permission on Monday, and we're calling it the Schoolhouse. And it's really a mix of a traditional kind of conference space, but we've incorporated some really key elements, not just the neuroaesthetic elements, but you'll notice that like there's transparent drapes everywhere instead of walls. So we want to have that open and transparent culture that we value so heavily at Google. We want that to come across in the space. So there's the neuroaesthetic elements that we've incorporated, but also Google's culture. And we've been extremely diligent about making sure that the way that we've put this together feels, as we say, Googly. So we're migrating several of our programs over here, and like I said, event spaces is something that we think a lot about, so we're not gonna bring everything. You know, the well-being program for everybody who's feeling a little burnt out, like that's not gonna be on campus. That's probably not a great idea. You know, getting a little further away is a better idea. But for Nooglers, those new Googlers, they're still really excited, right? Like they just wanna be at Google. It's weird if like on day 3, you're like, all right, we're gonna leave now. Like, that's strange. They want to be on campus. So our Noogler programs and our onboarding programs kind of within the first year of a leader's life cycle with us, those are ideal for bringing to a place like the Schoolhouse. Okay, so we're really at the beginning of all of this. We're in process. We're experimenting with physical space fueled by neuroscience, immersive experiences that challenge leaders' mindsets, their assumptions, their beliefs, and experiential learning through unconventional methods like art. Integration across all touch points that a leader has with the school is also really important to us. So remember, I was talking about consistency, not just intensity. We incorporate things like mindsets, for instance, into everything. It's not just the content, it's the emails that we send to invite you to a program and how we choose the language that go in those emails. It's the policies and the processes that we put together so that at every point in the journey, a leader can start to notice that mindsets are reflected at every touch point. We're really thinking about, okay, how do we continually make leaders self and situationally aware? And we're treating, again, leadership development with this consistency and shifting the conversation around what it means to be a leader at Google and what it means to be a leader for the world. And as I think we all know, when we shift the conversation, we shift reality. Thank you so much for your attention. I have 7 minutes for questions if anyone has one to ask. All right, any questions?
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm over here.
There you are. There's another light. Okay.
My question was, what is a typical size of group on these leadership immersion programs, and how are participants selected for that?
Yeah, so the typical size really varies. So for our VP population, it might be in the neighborhood of 15 to 20. For our director population, which is a lot larger, we've actually gone up to 60 before. The beauty of our immersion programs is that we just need more facilitators. We can run them as big as we need to run them, as long as we have enough people to be able to man all of the small groups, because it's important that we have the right ratio of participants to facilitators. Selection, the way that we're running, and this actually may change in the near future, but the way that we run our programs right now is that it's actually open enrollment as long as you meet a set of criteria. So you have to have been in your role for a certain amount of time for particular programs, and for some programs, and leadership immersion is one of them, you have to have gone through other programs that are earlier on in the development journey in order to attend. Now, as Google continues to get bigger, our leadership population is finally catching up. So we may end up switching to more of a nomination-based, or application-based model for immersion in particular, but we haven't decided yet. Thank you. Yeah.
So my question's also about the immersion program. So obviously, with the comments that followed the immersion, there was a deeply emotional moment that took place in those. I'm curious, and also based upon the flavor of the comments, because you're going into some of these areas that have some level of turmoil or some level of need, is there a community involvement component to that, and what is the role of that leader to help solve or leave an impact behind?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there's definitely an emotional element. This is like the 4th time that I've talked about immersion, and I still can't get through the Detroit part without choking up. So the community is very involved. So we work with community leaders. One of my favorites that we work with in Detroit is called Blight Busters. They are a nonprofit that goes in and tears down blighted homes, and then they call Habitat for Humanity and say, hey, super weird, empty lot if you want to build something. So it's, we work with Downtown Boxing Club, and so we meet up with all of these community leaders who are trying to make a positive impact in these really difficult locations. And the leaders, the thing that's been really cool, the Google leaders, is that there's no requirement for, hey, you have to solve this, or hey, you have to positively, contribute to solving this problem, but oftentimes they do. And we have some leaders who went through our first immersions years ago who are still really involved in the organizations that were featured during their immersion. And we have some leaders who even now serve on their boards. So by the time you're done spending 5 days with these people, you're ready to help Detroit or to help West Virginia, which is pretty amazing. So we don't mandate anything, but people just kind of do it on their own. Thank you. Yeah, right here.
Could you talk a little bit about the mindset, assumptions, and identity pieces that you focus on within the program?
So the specific mindsets?
Yeah.
I cannot,
Okay.
unfortunately. So they are still proprietary, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to publish before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, right
What
here.
is the biggest challenge you have, and what are you personally passionate about?
Oh, the biggest challenge we have. Oh my gosh. I would say scale is still challenging for us. We're really good at scale, at Google for the most part. And I think that, with programs like this, being able to have kind of that close connection between people, we're not going to run something that's like a 300-person conference, where you may not be able to personally talk to your facilitator over the course of a few days. But we could, because we have enough people to be able to do it. So it's hard to really think about, okay, as we continue to get bigger and our leadership population continues to get bigger, who gets to go? And what does the shape of these cohorts look like? As I said, in some cases, we're going all the way up to 60. But for other programs, we have a women's well-being program that I run, that I talked about at the HCI conference in July. And that one, the sweet spot is 14 to 16. And once you get past 16, you start seeing ooh, actually, I think this being bigger is not actually serving these women. So what do we do in those cases? Do we just add more cohorts? Do we think more about the design? We don't want to lose some of that magic as we continue to get bigger. And then what I'm personally passionate about is that we are talking about improving and preparing humanity for the future. And I could not be more grateful to work at a company that thinks that way. Thank you. I have 1 minute left. Any more? Okay, great. Well, folks, I will be here for the rest of the day. Thank you again for your attention, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.